Good day, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to another conversation, connecting conversations with Cohesia Connect. And this week, we, the founders, have decided to take stage and have a really candid and open discussion with you all about us, about Cohesia Connect, about life in general. And we hope that you find this conversation really engaging, captivating, and you learn a little bit about us. So,
I
welcome.
love how you used "we're taking the stage" because it's so dramatic, but so true. Like, life is literally a stage at the moment, isn't it?
It is. So why not be at the forefront of it?
Center stage. I like that. Connecting conversations and center stage with the founders. This is going to be a good one, I think, for sure.
Indeed, it is indeed. So in today's conversation, we just, like I said, we want to be really candid, really open, let you in on a little bit about who we are and our journeys, our backgrounds, and why D&I and it is so important to us, and bringing these conversations to the forefront is as well. So I guess we can kickstart the conversation again, maybe doing a little introduction about us once again, because they haven't heard us for a while.
Yeah.
I thought let's do a quick round robin about who we are, where we came from, our background, whatever you want to share. So, Carla, you can go first.
I love how you dropped me in there first. That's great. Awesome. I love that you said that's just like a little bit, about who we are, to be candid about it. And I think what we try to kind of establish with these conversations from the get-go is really to bring to the forefront people's stories. And I think when we were having a discussion about this conversation, it's like, well, isn't it about time that we started sharing our own? We've been very busy. And I love, this is why I was laughing about why you said we've been setting a stage for other people to be amplified. And it's actually really important to see who are the strings behind the curtain. And it really is us. So a huge hello to everyone. If this is your first time joining this conversation, or you have found us, by the way, we're so happy that you're here. I'm Carla. You can see our little taglines there on the screen. We're the founders of Cohesia Connect. And really, I think we're founded on something that has been really mutual, even though we come from very different backgrounds, which has also been such a story in itself, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I was working in education, particularly the secondary education sector, and just became really passionate at the end tail of my career about noticing that there is such a desire and a need for conversations with regards to diversity, representation, not just something that I'd experienced in my field, but also just looking at curriculum. I've been at the forefront of looking at curriculum in school and how there is very little acknowledgement, let alone kind of like forward and intentional space to have difficult conversations that if you were just to look at the news in one day, you can see how there are so many schisms between groups of people, or there's such a lack of unity just in terms of human promotion and kind of like togetherness. And that's really kind of what drew me to trying to start searching. Like, I can feel this is a pull for me. Where's my place in it? And I mean, long story short, I know we're going to get in there at some point today, but this is kind of, I think it's like we were drawn to each other in the most random way because we were both searching for something that we noticed there was a gap in, to do with the space within DEI, which we already know is a huge spectrum, but specifically within education, and particularly about bridging that gap, workplace and people coming into the workplace, preparing them rather than having to deal with just the corrective measures that we see kind of coming into, general policy within the workplace and workforce now, looking at where can we prevent some of this stuff? Where can we prepare people? Because people are hungry to learn. And, this is kind of how we've become what we are here at Cohesia Connect. I think is that like in a nutshell introduction?
I think so. and you rightly said, people are willing to learn, and people are inquisitive. As human beings, we're naturally inquisitive, and we want to know, and we want to find out why. We like to ask the why question. Why does this happen? Why does this do this? And we're hoping that we provide a space that we can at least help to build the blocks and bridges to that why. So I guess in terms of myself, again, I'm Evelkah Powell. I'm one of the founders here at Cohesia Connect, and I guess my background comes more from the D&I space, working within the very corporate industry, from recruitment, and then I found my footing in the D&I space, where I had the privilege of being a chair at one organization of the D&I board, which I absolutely loved. And the people that I worked with were amazing and really, really on board with the conversation and the work that needed to happen. And then I dipped in and out of that and recruitment, but for some reason I always came back to D&I and worked for D&I organizations, and then led me to land my current I'll say day job to be a D&I specialist working with an investment banking client. But all that is to say, the passion for D&I really, I guess, amplified from a young girl, I would say.
Mm.
When I was a little girl, I used to say to myself and my mom, I'm going to be a humanitarian because I love people. I love humans. And I
Oh, I
want to
love that.
make sure that everyone has all the opportunities in the world, and I want to make sure everyone is equal. At that time, I didn't really know what that meant, but for
Yeah.
some reason, I had this desire or passion that I felt like I was born with to
Mm.
change something. A word I used a lot growing up is, wanting to change. I wanted to do something that would help other people, or change the status quo, or challenge it, or make something anew again.
Mm.
And I think, I thought law was the best thing to do that, best route to do that. I was really intrigued in justice and, and carrying out justice. So I thought, yeah, I'm going to do law. And then I realized, actually, I have an interest in politics and international relations, and I studied that at university. And even before university and my sixth form, I knew exactly what my dissertation was going to be, and it was going to be about women's rights and challenging the stereotypes around women. And
So a
uh,
trailblazer from early on. I mean, why
yeah,
are we even surprised that we're here today, to be honest? Such a
so,
clear, direct way forward here. This is amazing.
so it was just like it was naturally with me, and I guess I carried that all throughout growing up, and then entering in a work world. I guess try to find my footing as to where best I can do so. And when we met, very unconventionally,
Right.
I guess it really our synergies. We really had a good synergy in regards to our passions and our desire to want to do something different and really amplify underrepresented voices, and those
Mm.
voices that perhaps we don't really get the platform or the space to acknowledge. And once we started talking, and I realized how our passions can really combine and collide,
Yeah.
I thought this is a great opportunity to work together and see what we can develop from here. And voila, Cohesia
The
Connect was
rest is
born,
history, or
and
rather, history in the making.
here we are today. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a little bit about my initial journey and how we got here.
I'm going to ask you a question, and I love that
Yeah.
you literally gave in like a 30-second reel of Evelkah's life flash forward. Clearly a very like trailblazer child, knew what she wanted, headstrong, went for all the big guns, justice, politics, international relations, law. I mean, you just weren't messing around. Like, and it's interesting that you said that you feel this is with you from like the
Mm,
start. I mean, was there like a particular moment where you realized you saw something maybe, or
mhm,
something that, besides it being a natural grain for you, was
mhm,
this something that was like visibly, or a significant moment that kind of,
mhm.
I realized that this is what I am inside? Was there ever a moment like that for you?
Good question. I think my 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 mom and people around me when I was growing up in the Caribbean, I guess I forgot to mention that. I
There we
didn't
go,
grow up
guys.
in
Information
the UK.
101.
I'm Caribbean, specifically I'm Anguillian, repping 264. Um, have to mention that. Um, so I guess growing up in the Caribbean, it was an Anguilla, shall I say. I had people around me who helped me to acknowledge and come to terms as to who I am. I think I always knew I was I was different, and I'm gonna be a bit bold and go ahead and say special, in the sense that I knew what I carried, but I just didn't know what it was. And it was crazy. People would come up to my mom and be like, your child is so blessed, and your child is going to do great things. And at the time, you're just like, yay. But I think I would say what really made sense to me. I don't know. This is a very vague memory, but I remember um seeing something on telly, and it was around some humanitarian efforts
Yeah.
that was happening within African um in one of the African countries. And it for me, it just clicked. I was just like, that's change. Like,
Yeah.
that's not right. And from a little girl, I just acknowledged that that wasn't how I wanted to grow up in a world where there were people and children like me that didn't have food when I was blessed with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it was very, for a child as young as I was at the time, it was very eye-opening, and it really pulled the heartstrings. And I said to myself, like, I need to be able to change something,
Mm.
whatever it is. Like, this is not right. And I just didn't like to see it. I think as a child, you grow up thinking, oh, I like this, I don't like that. And for me, that was one of the things I didn't like to see. So I guess from that point, it really clicked into my mindset that this was it. And I guess growing up in a very religious household
Mm.
also equipped me with the understanding that I wasn't put on this world for the sake of it. I was put here for a reason and a purpose. And I guess that was very much embedded into who I am, and the values that I upheld. So I think, yeah, that's where it all clicked and started. I hope that answered your question. I felt like I rambled.
Absolutely. I definitely want to pick out a few bits from there as well. It's really interesting to hear, I think, the motivations. And I think what I find particularly interesting, and yes, you are incredibly special. I can concur with that in the most positive ways that ever could be kind of, considered in the term.
Mm,
Um, I think, like you said, recognizing as such a young child a sense of this is who I am,
mm,
or just an awareness and comprehension of there are others out there who don't have my privilege, is a
mm,
hugely poignant factor. It's
mm,
not commonly associated with children, and this
yeah.
is not a criticism to other children, but generally speaking, we're kind of taught the general thing is that children are quite self-centered because all they know is themselves. They're not aware, or don't quite have the cognitive ability to recognize necessarily different, or life is different to my world.
Mm,
And then I think, as you also described, like you ended up, following different paths that still seemed to be ingrained with that inner person that you already knew existed, and you
yeah.
were just waiting for time to almost hurry up so she could come outside and be actualized. Do you feel like those were things that you consciously went for, or do you feel that that path kind of found you? Does that make sense? I'm talking about a relationship between what you felt inside and then what was
Mm.
happening externally. But it seems to be that they were all kind of compatible with each other along the steps so far.
Yeah, I think the decisions were that I made, and don't get me wrong, there were some decisions that perhaps I wasn't very conscious about, and it
Mm,
turned out to be not the right decision. But I think in regards to the parts that I chose, I think they were pretty much compatible in that sense,
mm,
because I think they all derived from the feeling of there needs to be a change.
yeah.
And how do I go about it? And I think, when I was when I was growing up in primary school, we had to, what's it called? We had an assembly where our parents would come in,
Mm.
and on the walls it would be all the things that children wanted to be when they grew up.
I
On
feel that's like in every single primary school somewhere. Yeah,
And then the
absolutely.
parents would come in and kind of go around the room looking at
Mm,
what different children wanted to be. And I don't remember what I actually put down for mine, but I would assume it was something around lawyer. I don't know. From a young girl, I used to always say, yeah, I want to be a lawyer. I don't know what it is. And that's the whole point why we migrated to the UK, because my mom was just like, yeah, she wants to study law. And then I came here and I was just like, no. Wrong
That's very
decision.
allowed. Plans are allowed to change.
So
That's incredible.
I think the experiences I had really aligned with my inner purpose and my passion of
Mm.
wanting to change. I think they all manifested in different ways. And the experiences I had and lived experiences I had also helped to pivot that direction as well. So, for instance, I'm very open. You know, my parents are divorced, so even that, going through as a young child and experience and seeing what that is like, it gave me an eye-opening perspective, whereby I can use my lived experience and understanding of what was going on around me to change again something and to support people who have been in this position, or children that perhaps haven't dealt well with it. So it was, I think that my whole life experiences has been a result of teaching me, okay, these are certain aspects that can help you get to the next step. You have to experience it to understand in order for you to really change the world.
I think that is a huge acknowledgement. I think
Mhm.
I came across a post the other day or something in my scrolling on social
Mhm.
media, and somebody said, I will always win, whether or not I win in terms of an achievement or I win because a lesson has been learned.
Yeah.
It is astounding to me that from such a young age, you yourself have been able to translate. I would
Mm,
say, like, coming from a home that's gone through divorce is not easy. I have not heard anybody ever relate or narrate their experience of that in a way that wasn't in some way, quite a challenge, should I say, or
mhm,
quite
mm,
it takes so much from everybody involved because it's a family, right?
yeah.
And for you to be able to see and recognize, like, this is an opportunity rather than,
Mm,
for others, it can be derailing, and understandably so. I'm not saying in any shape or
yeah.
form that one way is better than the other, but
Mm.
listening to your story and acknowledging, like, for me, like, where do you feel like you've been able to garner strength to do that? Because it takes a lot to be able to choose to view things the way that you do.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard. I'm not gonna sit here and say that I didn't find it difficult, because it was. I was a daddy's girl, so that literally ripped. And I would openly say that was probably my first heartbreak ever that I experienced. But I think for me, it was. I can't quite put my finger on it or describe it, because it's such an internal thing that I experienced. But it was more like this. It was more like a lesson. I felt like I had to go through that. I felt like, as much as I would have loved to see my parents be together and not have,
Mm,
neither of them to go through that, I think for me, it was a lesson that I needed to learn, um, and to experience and see and witness. Because without that, I would go as far and say I would have had a limited, and probably a reductive view of how I see things. And I think specifically in regards to relationships, but also in regards to resilience. Because I think that was my first time ever having to be resilient. And if that never happened, would I have gotten an experience like that? I don't know.
mm,
But that definitely was my first, I would say, lesson of resilience, and how I can overcome a situation that is not very pleasing or pleasant to experience
yeah.
as a child. But also I was an older sister, so I had to make sure that my younger sister
Born
felt
leader.
felt like she had someone. And I think I guess it was part of my nature. I don't remember, if I'm honest, um really crying about it, if that makes sense. I possibly had some times where I did, but I don't think it affected me the way that perhaps other children would have been affected. I don't get me wrong, I probably derailed and disobeyed my mom, because I part of me blamed her for it, and part of me blamed my dad, and the blame game. But I think from the domino effect of that has really helped to build who I am today, and build my relationships and how I overcome certain relationships and hardships. So yeah.
I think that's huge, and thank you so much, like, for sharing that in such a candid way. And I imagine that will resonate with so many people, maybe not even just exclusively to coming from a divorce background, but also the element of, like, there were some lessons that I had to learn quite quickly to become resilient for this world. And I want to talk a little bit about that resilient kind of building, because I feel like so appropriately now in the active work that you do in the remit of DEI, it really requires resilience, right? Because waiting for very big changes, the uprooting of mindsets, the ability to bring together people where, you know, not all parties want to participate in a unification, and being someone who's willing to do the time, to do the grafting, to have patience, and to do what it takes to kind of, you know, accommodate for all of these variables, because people are complex, right?
Yeah.
I see such value in hearing your story, and I can see, like, even though that example might feel quite different to the work that we talk about here on Connecting Conversations, but actually, in principle, from human value and character building, that resilience element has clearly been fostered in you, in a way that, you know, it sounds like there was nothing you could really do but actually go through and learn that lesson from your experience. And you've brought that same trait and developed skill to what you're doing now. In which ways would you say, could you see, like, you can see such positive impact of this resilience that kind of was forged into you from such a young age? Where have you seen it, like, really effective in your life now?
I think first and foremost, it's probably in relationships and stakeholder engagement, because you will get a lot of people, especially within D&I space, you get a lot of people who would say, well, D&I isn't important. It's not really a priority, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know,
not something we enjoy hearing at Cohesia Connect.
no. And you have to be resilient with those people within that space, because for some people, they just don't understand. And we have to accept that not everyone does want to engage in a conversation like this, and that's okay. But it can be heartbreaking, because you try so hard to do the right thing and to change and, you know, make an impact. But I guess you have to realize that it's not going to happen the way you want it to, or the way you hoped that it would. So you have to be resilient in the fact that it might not go the way you think it will, but eventually it will happen. And I think embedding that into employee relations, whereby you would experience microaggressions, especially as a Black woman, and having to go through that in a workplace, you have to be resilient, because you can't just stop and cry about it at every point. But you have to learn to understand that, okay, what can I take from this? Like, how can I overcome this? What are the solutions I can do or create as a result of this experience? Can I then set up a Black employee network within the organization? Can I go and speak about my experiences on a podcast, in a newsletter, write it down in a journal? I don't know, whatever works for people, but in that sense, you have to be resilient, because experiencing daily things like discrimination, racism, ableism, homophobia, and all of it, we really need to be resilient, because it's not an easy battle. And whoever thinks embarking within the D&I space is a walk in a park, I would advise them to turn around. Because it is not the case. You have to have a hard shell, because there will be a lot of things that will be thrown at you, and people won't listen. Some people just won't listen, and you have to accept that.
Is there, like, an example that you can think of where kind of, like, the resilience really paid off, and you saw, as a result of, you know, waiting it out, or being patient, or being persistent, as a result of that resilience, you kind of saw the other side in a rewarding way?
Yes, I would say definitely in terms of So for instance, we're going back at the height of COVID 2020, the George Floyd murder happened, and then subsequent murders happened in regards to the Black population in the US. That was a time where everyone was just like going forth and create, there were so many
Yeah.
organizations starting to uplift and amplify the voices.
Yeah.
And I think as a result of that, and those organizations that were resilient and that really did listen at that point,
Mm.
have subsequently, they have now reaped the benefits of continuing to go through that battle, even after the murder happened, even after the COVID
Mm.
pandemic
Mm.
came to an end. And the fact that especially now where I see a lot of companies going through diversity fatigue and, making
Mm.
people redundant, and those organizations that are sticking to it and really, really paving the way, I've seen such positive impact in regards
Yeah.
to employee retention, in regards to performance within an organization, profitability, and all of it. So I do think that being resilient in matters such as that does pay off. And in my own experience, I would say, I guess, when I was in my first ever job, I was really
Mm.
eager to do something inclusion, D&I related,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I just didn't have the space to do it. I
Mm.
didn't have the space to do it. And as much as I tried, it just wasn't there. So I think my resilience to be patient, even after I did get a lot of no's. I remember applying for jobs within the inclusion space and again getting no's and being
You
told that,
just went on and created your own space, right?
yeah, getting turned down and all of that. I think if I weren't resilient, I probably wouldn't have been in the job that I am today. But the fact is that
Mm.
I was resilient, and now I'm in a position where I can actually influence and make a difference to the clients and the organizations that I'm
Yeah.
working with. And Cohesia Connect is, I guess, helping to birth that passion and
Mm.
that space where I can do that even more.
I love that so much. I really, really do. I would say like it sounds to me like you've through all of what you've said, purpose has been kind of like
Mm,
the baseline motivator for everything.
yeah.
And you've recognized like resilience has been like a strong trait to carry you through to this point. Has there
Mm.
been anything else that you've seen just as an individual develop in you in this whole process of pursuing that purpose?
Good question. I would
You're
say
very welcome. I am trying.
I would say confidence. I think even if I look, to be honest, I've always been confident, but I think confidence has its different nuances, and it's
Mhm.
in different spaces. Yeah, it's not the same. But I think the fact is that I'm here telling my story, and the fact that I actually overcame my fear and reached out and connected with yourself to create Cohesia Connect, that is for me one of the biggest achievements in regards to things that I've learned about myself as a result of my passion. I've always been passionate, but that passion almost got lost and buried due to my lack of confidence in really pushing the barriers and really pushing what I want, because it was always people pleasing and wanting to do what other people thought that would be great for me, or what other people thought that would be ideal. And I think it was just kind of getting through that fear of, okay, now I can focus on me, and that fear of doubt
Mm.
and imposter syndrome to really unravel and unwrap my confidence that I knew was there. I've always had it, but
Yeah.
the fact is I wasn't tapping into it to really unleash the passion um, in in a way that would make a huge impact.
And was it like a specific point where you're like, that's it, no more? I know this is in there. I've been sitting the lid on what I know is inside me. Was there a moment that you're like, no more, and then you stepped out? Was there like a turning point, or a pivotal moment for you? Or did it just all of a sudden you woke up and right, that's just it? Do you know what I mean?
I think there were things that nudged me to it, and
Yeah.
it was a gradual process. I don't think I woke up one day and I was just like, oh yay. I think it
Or
was a
no, this is enough. I can't pretend
yeah,
anymore. I need to like bring the real girl through,
yeah.
that sort of thing.
I definitely think it was a gradual process, but I think where it really all clicked is when I decided that I was going to get therapy. Um,
Wow.
I think, funnily enough, when I started therapy, that's when everything changed for me.
Amazing.
As in my mindset, how I feel about myself, and really getting down. I think I recommend therapy to everyone now because it really allows you to go deep within, in a safe space, in a
Mm,
controlled environment that would allow you to go through those memories and reflections. Um, so I think it was definitely the moment when I started therapy, I started finding bits and bits about myself. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I am I am an amazing human being. I'm sorry.
yes, you are.
And
That's such an
why
incredible thing to
have I
learn.
been hiding that just because people might
Yeah,
think I'm big-headed or arrogant? No, uh, I was born to be great. So we got to unleash some of this baggage that, that people think that, oh yeah, she's just doing it or saying it for saying its sake. No, no, I came here with a mission and I'm coming here to accomplish that mission. And yeah, here I am.
that's incredible. I feel like there is definitely not enough, should I say, space or platforms given to really amplify how important the gift of therapy can be for enabling people to come through to themselves and to learn about themselves and just be kind of like set free in a way that they get to be the best of who they are.
Yeah,
And
certainly.
it's really encouraging to hear such a positive, like you said, like endorsement of it. And let me tell you, like, I've been there. This is helping me to take those steps,
Mm,
because really the only shoes you're going to live in are your own. And the
yeah,
only person I'm going to really live with,
it's yourself.
to do this life is going to be the way I make it in this body. And what
Mm,
am I doing for the health of that? And I think we're maybe getting there now. I think as a generation now, people are a lot more open to that. But
mhm,
I still think there's work to be done in people really embracing how
mhm.
much of a crucial kind of tool that will be to kind of really help people to just explode into their most awesome selves.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I guess now let's switch the spotlight on you. I think I've done enough talking about
You
me.
think so? I want to hear more. Absolutely. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Um, but I guess my question to you would be around your heritage, because I know a lot of people would look at you and think, yeah, I know she's mixed race or I know she's biracial, but people play the guessing game with you, don't they?
I
And
do. They definitely do. Some don't even know that I'm mixed race, or as you say, biracial. Some
yeah,
I remember when I was in Rome once, and this random, very, very Italian person was just chatting to me and just wouldn't stop talking. I was like, I'm really sorry, but you've got to other, but you're Italian. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm really not. I feel like I've had this is the fun part of it. I've been asked if I'm Egyptian many times by native Egyptians. I get a
wow.
lot of the North African or Arabic kind of, curiosity.
Mhm, mm,
And it is interesting because, like you said, I've turned it into a game where, so like, I know not everybody actually receives that type of
yeah,
inquiry in a positive way. I've
mm,
got to say that's not been my experience, and I'm glad for that, because
yeah,
I've always seen it as, because I, like you, also love people. I think the fact that we've loved people in very different kind of ways, in the way that it's been reflected and expressed in our work and passions
mhm,
and pursuances, it's interesting for me because I also have loved cultures and like diversity, even
mhm,
though I didn't know that was a term to be used in DI. I found myself naturally drawn to difference in cultures, difference in,
yeah,
cultural practices, mindsets, actually just how people think in different parts of the world outside of the West.
mhm, yeah,
um so for me, it was a fun game because I loved people so much, and like being in cultures that were not, part of my origin. And I used to joke and say, by the time they figure out who I really am, thinking that I look like someone from their own native, they love me too much, and it's, they can't get rid of me now because I've made my way in there. Uh, and I joke and laugh about that, but I think only getting older and getting on this journey with D&I myself, realizing how kind of, like you said, I've also felt incredibly blessed by my part of this story, in that because this has been such a big part of who I am, the ambiguity of perhaps my ethnic origin has been a bridge factor for me between many communities. And one that I value so highly. I really, really do. I feel like I was born to be that way. I was on purpose designed this way, to look this way, to sound this way, for that reason, that people would see or identify in something that they think they see in me, but actually just find a person, even when they realize that what they thought was there isn't actually there.
And I think now more than ever, we're seeing a population that's becoming more and more biracial, or even ethnic background, different ethnicities coming together, and religions. Exactly. There is now becoming a merge amongst diversity, where the intersectionality comes in, and why that's
absolutely.
But from your experience as someone who acknowledges themselves and identifies as biracial, what does that really mean to you?
That's a really, really, I think it's a tough question, because I feel like, is it a trick one? And especially because I think even conversations surrounding that type of question tend to sometimes come with like tones of hostility or suspicion. And I think for me, I've always thought about being put in boxes. So my birthplace is South Africa. And if anyone historically knows much about South Africa, in the year 1994, they actually came out of an era called apartheid, which separated people due to their color skin tone. So those who would be the so-called, I say in brackets, whites or Europeans, were separate and were seen as superior, or of like more valued, or in a higher social class than those that had mixed skin tone like mine, or those that actually were natively from the African states surrounding in South Africa. So it comes with a very difficult kind of phrasing for me, or difficult connotation, if I may say. And I think also, even if you were to say that to a South African, that comes with all of that kind of history, because what that meant for them. When I hear that term growing up in the UK, since I was about 9 to 10 years old, that also has very different implications, and the negativities are associated in different ways, but very valid as well. So for me, and also like our counterparts, over the Atlantic in America, being biracial also carries a whole lot of other nuances and layers as well. So for myself, I've had to really figure out, do I want to be, almost feel a bit like a ping pong ball, because in whichever community that I'm in, am I fitting into their mold of what it means to be mixed race? Because actually it's not the same. And for a while, I was just like, I just want to be seen as mixed, because I represent like diverse culture. So my great grandfather was born in England. My grandfather was born in England. They are Englishmen, and they made their homes with native South African women, some who were mixed, some who were not, and also have similar stories of like intersectional families coming together. So for me, I'm just like, all I knew, because my family was so blended in that way. I even think that now has connotations, that term, blended families, whatever, culturally speaking. For me, that was something that I was just like, I don't actually have room to think about being racist, or about, am I going to box myself here, or do I feel more associated with one group or another? Because this is my family, this is my blood. How can you ask me to kind of make definitions? Because in trying to make definitions, you're ending up separating people, and I never want to be separate from my people. So that's kind of, I hope that's kind of like an insight as to how I see that. It's a loaded term. It's not as simple as like ticking a box on a form. And I think for myself, I've probably had quite a tumultuous struggle with it internally, trying to avoid in any way trying to fit other people's or societal ideals of what it means to be mixed race, because it's not simple. And I also respect that my experience, even the way that I've narrated that right now, is different to someone else that might also have fit into that kind of category of, I'm also mixed race, but their experience is nothing like mine.
And how do you think that plays out in in education spaces, because you went to university,
Yeah.
you had a group. I know at university, I was definitely a part of, well, I say a part of, I tried to be a part of the Afro-Caribbean group. And I personally, even though I looked like them and everything like that,
Yeah.
and there were similarities, I did feel a stark detachment from them in some type of
Mm.
way. I can imagine me looking like them. You know, some people might find that crazy, but for you, that might have been a whole different experience.
Absolutely, actually. You're not wrong. I think my experience, again, this is unique to me and my story. Like, I actually found quite a lot of hostility because I wasn't quite dark enough or
Mm,
black looking enough.
mm,
And also, I wasn't trying to fit the stereotype either, which I think has come with many different nuances as well, of
mm,
what it meant to be urban or what it meant to be stereotypically Afro or Caribbean.
mm,
And I think that's to do with like the way that I was also raised in my family culture. And like I said, coming from a mixed background, a lot of the kind of focus is on like be a good person, build good like character. Do you
mm,
have integrity? Do you have good work ethic? Are you kind to the
mm,
next person, regardless of people's background or socioeconomic status? That
mhm.
was kind of like the first and foremost values. And like yourself, I also grew up in a faith background. So for us, identification is primarily associated with that. And for
Yeah,
me, it's like if I focused on the character traits that were associated with my faith background, like I said, all those character traits of integrity, what it
mm,
means to be kind, what it means to be loving to people that maybe not that don't look like you or sound like you or even have different kind of personal convictions to you, there is
yeah,
a set way in which I was taught to live and values to abide by. So that is what I led with. I never led with my color. In fact, I felt for the first time I was forced to identify that or see that this is actually something that others were doing. And then I was in a comparison space, was at university. So I really resonate with what you said, is that even amongst, I didn't really feel very welcome in the ACS or Afro-Caribbean Society at the time.
mm,
I had a lot of friends who were from there. But outside of that space specifically where it was like um within that society's events and stuff, it was the focus on those elements. But
mm,
when we weren't in that environment, I just loved my friends. So I felt like if we were to be hanging around or fraternizing in like that space, it would be different. It would have a different change. I just wanted to be with the people that I loved and cared about, and
yeah,
tried actually my hardest to not get boxed into those categories, because I could see also changed and shifted. And you could see that rightly so, where a lot of in those environments, what was raised was the marginalizations, how people have felt kind of, you know, there's a disparity with how they're treated in terms of jobs or in kind of aspirations. And that was a place where they had a chance to kind of come around those issues and talk about them.
mhm,
In that environment, what I found is like all they did was focus on a lot of negative things rather
mhm,
than how can we move forward in terms of bridging gaps. And that is not to say that we ignore what has happened. It doesn't ignore very valid reasons of where people have experienced terrible things, which they shouldn't have. But in the same breath, for me, I felt like if I was to dwell in that space, we're not also going to move further. We're just going to continue perpetuating the cycle and end up
yeah.
putting up walls rather than building bridges.
Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree. I think, yes, there is a time to reflect and really understand what went wrong,
Yeah,
and acknowledge that was wrong, or that was discriminatory, or that was
yeah,
racist or homophobic, or whatever it may be. We have to acknowledge those wounds in
yeah,
order
yeah.
for us to really identify what the problem is, and therefore then create solutions. I think some people get caught up, and I'm going to use the analogy of wounds, because I think it is, in fact,
100%.
social
Such a great
wound.
such a great term to describe it.
It's a social wound that we carry
Yeah.
around, and we keep adding salt to it. And we keep picking at it, and we keep dwelling on it, when in fact we just need to let it be and see what we can do to move on, see how we can heal. So whether
Mm,
that is, like I said at the start, finding an environment where you feel like you can really thrive and belonging, going into some, for some people those networks are perfect.
yeah.
I prefer, I guess, now that I'm more in the corporate environment and I've been exposed to different people now, I can see people that have as a result flourished by
Yeah.
not, you know, sitting on those wounds and not holding on to them, but actually observing them, analyzing them, and then figuring out how they can move on. I think
Yeah.
sometimes we get too stuck in the burden that we
Yeah.
carry
Agreed.
instead of
Agreed.
really focusing on, okay, this is what we can do to make things better or change or and things like that. And someone said, and I think it was a few people that have said this, you know, if we constantly try to look for someone like us,
Mm,
we'll be looking for ages. But we have to sometimes become the people that we want to see. And even if that means that you're the first, it's
yeah.
okay. I think some people we tend to look up and think, oh, but there's no one that looks like me, so therefore I can't reach it.
Mhm, mhm.
I disagree. I completely disagree. If no one that looks like you, you make it your mission to be that person. So when there are other people coming up behind, you have a ladder already supporting them on how they can get to
Yeah.
that place. I think we really need to shift that mindset.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I think that's exactly kind of how I feel that my life journey has kind of been. I've never seen anybody else like myself in the room. But I think also, like yourself, being someone who was kind of, who felt a very innate sense of purpose about, there is something that I'm supposed to be doing here in my time on this planet for however long that's going to be. And
Mm,
outside of that as well, is never being afraid. I've never actually looked at, in terms of my skin color, as a determining factor as to why I should or shouldn't be in any room. If I
mm,
found myself in a room, my first question is, what is my role here? To normally build a bridge, to do something positive, or to deposit or leave something behind for somebody else to carry. In no concept of my mind growing up did I think that was something specifically necessary to do with my skin tone or someone else's, because I was already ready that if perhaps my space in that room was to encourage someone who might have been from a completely different ethnic background to me, great. If that's what I inspired, good. If the job was going to be done and the objective was going to be met and the purpose was going to be accomplished, I
yeah.
was good with that. But I
Mm,
think it was only later on in life, and I think, just to go back to your point, I agree with you. We cannot allow the fact that just because I might not see representation of my kind in a room, should this really paralyze me from actually making a new table and being the
mm,
person to be a pioneer or an instigator to allow room for others to come after you.
yeah.
I think that's so important. But then also outside of that, I think I realized as I grew on my journey with D&I, especially as I mentioned earlier, my tail end career within education,
Mm,
was still seeing how important it was. And I have this one story, and I've mentioned this one to you, so I'll share it now. I remember in my teacher training year and in my placement school, it was in a very, very high achieving all girls school. I mean,
mm,
they funnel in a lot of, elite institutions from that school, from there.
mhm.
And I was warned, be careful. These girls are so smart. They're going to try to outwit you and make you feel very small. They had no behavioral issues, which is wonderful, but you will have very snarky, very sarcastic, and very intellectual kind of condescension from these group of, we're
Mm,
talking girls at the age of between 15 and 18. Who knew that they'd be afraid, teachers could be afraid of students like that? And for me, it actually, when I heard that, it excited me. I was just like, I would love to see young women challenge me intellectually on
mm.
things that are really to do with building their brains and their philosophies. And
Yeah.
I'm here for the game. Let's go. But I realized literally as I got into the room, I was ready. I had my armor in place. Like, okay, I'm ready for the girls.
Yeah.
But what I got in there was no challenge like that. There was no hostility that I was warned about. What I did see though was so many young mixed race girls, and I'm so used to being kind of the only mixed race
Yeah.
person in my circles and in my environments, growing up in the south of England in suburban areas all the time,
Mhm.
villages and things, to see other girls look just like peering from behind their desks, because for the first time I realized they had seen someone who looks like them at the front of the room.
Mm,
And where that was not a determining factor for me, for the first time I realized there is still an importance of that
mm,
space of representation.
yeah.
And I was very happy to be part of, okay, if that's what my job is, to be here to inspire someone else, I'll take that, even though it wasn't something that necessarily I needed growing up. But
Yeah.
I could see the impact of that and just how powerful that was. And then
Mm.
they were so they were very kind. No one was ever rude. which I was a little disappointed. I came in there for the challenge. I was like, come on, girls, give me your best. But all, you know, just to say all of that in terms of, I realized that from my personal experience, I never needed someone that looked like me to aspire to get into a specific room or place that I wanted to accomplish and achieve or arrive at. But I
Yeah.
do recognize that actually, even more so with gusto, I need to do it because for some, they need to see themselves in
Yeah.
those spaces in
Oh,
before they
I
can
was just about to
aspire
say
there.
that for some people, especially, I guess, the environments that they occupy themselves. So, if we think about in some communities, let's say London, where Black communities in particular, they are, crippled by crime and teenage pregnancy and all these negative experiences where they feel like they have no way out. And I think at that point, for those individuals and young Black women in particular, they do need to see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's really important. And I'm not here denying to say that representation isn't, but it's more of the fact of you in yourself, you are blessed to have something in you to change the
Mm,
narrative. So it might not be in the capacity of building a business or going
mm,
into a corporate environment, but it can be in other ways.
yeah,
Everyone's journey and everyone's mission in life is different. And whether it's just speaking up on behalf of, your neighbor, I think those are the things that we need to acknowledge, even though it's small things. It's a step forward in aiming to change a narrative or speaking up against
mm,
life crime in London,
yeah,
and things like that. So I think it's important, even in spaces where people look like you. How can you stand out to make sure that there is a way out of such negative experiences, out of societal barriers? Because in fact, we were not here to suffer. Society has put up all these restrictions and all these boxes and puts people into them in order to, I'm going to say, go as far and say, manipulate you to thinking that you deserve to be in that space, but you really don't. You can crawl out, you can make something out of yourself. And I think it's for those people that perhaps haven't found or don't don't see a way out, it's so important to see representation. But I also want to instill in them that they can be part of that
mm,
representation too.
mm. I think you're right. I think we do have to acknowledge that some environments are created, and if that's literally what surrounds you and continuously is reiterated as low expectation or aspirations, that is going to have a level of bearing into how we may see the world, and that's totally
Mhm,
valid. But
mhm,
like you say, we are more empowered than maybe we even think that we are at times, and the opportunity to change that and be part of that change is actually open to anyone who's willing, and
mhm,
that's such an important thing to kind of
mhm,
recognize. And I'm hoping, like, as we kind of use connecting conversations, this platform is kind of like our way of trying to
mhm.
facilitate, this is our sign and signal, and talk about it and say there's ways out, how can we help, let's be encouraged that there are other routes, there are other ways that we can impact change in our own worlds.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's a brilliant message to close us off. Carly, you can take the floor in wrapping all of this up because I feel like we've talked a lot and I'm just like,
Yeah, this is I feel we should do this again. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I
I
think
did too. I think there is so much more we can talk about. I can sit here for days talking about this. I'm so passionate about it, but I think we don't want to leave the audience sitting here for ages. So
but also I'd like it that we'd like to keep them wanting for more. So I
yeah.
think it's been such a good insight to share like part of our stories, and I think it just continues to highlight, as much as I know you, I feel like I've learned so much more in this conversation than I still didn't know until this point. And it just again does nothing but affirm and highlight how positive it is to create a space where humans and their multifaceted elements get a chance to kind of have a seat at the table, have a chance to kind of have the light shine on them on the stage, as you said earlier. And
Mhm.
let's be about that, because I think the more that we can focus on these unique nuances that make us who we are humans are really beautiful and wonderful things, and let's be here to kind of draw that space that everyone feels kind of encouraged by that and they want to be part of what that means.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you to our audience for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you managed to get some tea and biscuits, because this was a juicy conversation.
Lots of tea. Lots of tea here.
We talked about a lot, and we hope to speak to you all again in the near future as we continue our series. Next time we have a wonderful guest, a close friend of mine that I'm excited to bring onto the platform, and we have plenty more to come. So stay tuned and have a lovely day, evening, morning, wherever you are, and stay blessed. Thank you for joining us.